So welcome to the Grants Workshop for Refugee and Migration Services on Team Global Hope at UCC National Ministries. We, for years, have been collecting funds that individual funders or collective funders have sent in to UCC National with the memo for Refugee and Migration Services, or sometimes for something specific that they want to see, that someone wants to see happen at the national level of the church. Usually it's not terribly specific, it's just I would like to see this money used in this range of activities. And so we on Team Global Hope create grants that match best practices of previously used grants, both in our office and best practices in general in refugee and migration services world. So we have 3 of them active right now. Many of you have asked about the Afghan resettlement grant. Unfortunately, that one has closed as most of our Afghan neighbors have been successfully resettled in the United States. The purpose of that grant has been to help churches, conferences, and associations get the necessary funding to host Afghan migrants during the crisis of last year. And I understand that many churches are still actively hosting Afghans who do need more support. There are other mechanisms for that, so don't worry. We adapted new grants. So the 3 grants we have, I'm just going to open them up on a share screen so you walk through them and be able to know what exactly is being asked for on all 3 of those grants. They all have really specific purposes. So the first one that I am going to walk through is going to be the one that is most like the Afghan resettlement grant. That one was specific only to Afghan populations because of the nature of that crisis. This one is going to be more open-ended. So let me go ahead and just open it up so that you can see it and I can explain it to you. So hold on, bear with me. I'm not very quick at learning how to share screen even after doing dozens of these. So bear with me, hold on. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, this bar always gets in the way of me trying to access this. Okay, there we go. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about is this, what I call the booster grant. So the last one, the Afghan one, was called a seed grant, and a seed grant is a specific type of grant that means that it's to create something new. So that was for any church that wanted to create a whole new project based on the crisis that was happening. A booster grant is meant to restart something that has already existed. So mainly this grant is meant to be used for already existing refugee and migration ministries, for example, an immigration working group or an individual church even, or a conference that has actively been doing refugee and migration services for a long-standing while. That doesn't mean that people who are interested in doing a new migration project can't apply for this grant. Preference is just given to those who already have an active ministry and have experience doing it. And the reason why we do it that way is because, like most granting organizations, if you have demonstrated a history of being able to do the type of work that you're applying for, you're usually eligible for higher amounts of money. And so that's what this is that you can apply if you are new to hosting refugees, advocating for them, or providing whatever services it is that that you feel called to providing. But you're just going to be eligible for a lower amount of money than an already existing immigration working group or church that has experience doing refugee resettlement or asylum accompaniment. So this is the description. As I said, lower amounts between $3,000 and $5,000 are for individual churches to host a single family. So we have many churches that have done this over at least the last year since I've been on Global Hope, who just need that extra boost of cash to be able to remodel an apartment for a family, or pay pay a stipend to a refugee office, or put a deposit down on an apartment, something like that, refinish an apartment, pay for visas, so forth. So that is for a single use, these smaller awards, and that can be for a new church that is doing it for the first time. Now, larger amounts, I'm just going to move some of this stuff around so I can see what I'm doing. Larger amounts between 5 and 7,000, even up to 10,000 for really big projects. We very rarely awarded 10,000 through this type of grant, but more realistically, 5 to 7,000 would be for a team of churches that are working together that have a long-standing history of doing this type of work. A example would be, a group of churches in a city who have partnered with their local nonprofit already, partner with the local refugee office or asylum shelter, have an already ongoing relationship with them, understand how the system works, and need that extra money to be able to host repeatedly multiple times. So we offer higher amounts of money for experience and repetition. So if it's a sustainable ministry that can keep going, it gets awarded more money than if it's a single use or a new project. Other examples of things that you could do with this money, it's actually pretty flexible, this one. So you could, we have some churches that are building ESL programs. Maybe your local refugee office has really low capacity, and all they do is resettle refugees and get them jobs, because as I've mentioned in previous workshops, jobs and housing are pretty much the only thing a refugee office has to do. So maybe that refugee office would really benefit from an ESL program, and you want to help them build one and get trained volunteers to host ESL classes or bring snacks or materials. We have several churches who have done that. You can apply for funding for an ESL program, or if you want to do a detention visitation program at an ICE detention center, that's another idea that you could do with this grant. For example, you want to be able to find ways to help folks that are in ICE detention be able to communicate with their families back home or their sponsors, or even better, help them find legal services and retain legal services. These are types of things that you can do with this grant. It is very flexible. Or a huge project that we're working on in refugee and migration is respite care programs. I will be sending all of you an email tomorrow in that the new crisis happening in the migration world, we've had a big year of migration crises. First there was the Afghan situation, and then Ukraine. Now what's happening is the governors of the southern states, Arizona, New Mexico, and mostly Texas, are sending buses of migrants up northward to cities without a plan for those migrants, just sending them. And churches and nonprofits are receiving them haphazardly in cities like, so far it's been DC and New York and now Chicago. And that's going to keep expanding, and I'm going to talk about that separately in an email. But this is a huge thing that's going to be happening in the migration world, is that we're going to see lots of buses that are going to be moving up from the southern border full of vulnerable folks who are asylum seekers and will need a lot of assistance. So we're going to be asking churches to work together with local nonprofits, city governments, and other ecumenical and interfaith colleagues to meet the needs of this impending situation that's happening. We are also working with government agencies such as FEMA and ICE to find further funding for this and resolve resource problems. But that's why I wrote Respite Care Program, is that that's going to be a major need that's going to be upcoming here in the next year. And again, I will write more about that too later because it's a big project. So yeah, basically the best case scenario that we like to see for applications for this is multiple churches working together, or a church working with nonprofits, or a church working with city governments, multiple churches working with city governments, in order to do a variety of activities that are related to assisting migrants sustainably. And that's not limited to refugees, is not limited to a type of nationality. It can be asylum seekers, refugees, it can even be undocumented folks. If you are a sanctuary church and you're trying to host someone for legal services because they are at risk of deportation, population. We definitely support that. COFA, which is a specialized population. It really isn't limited to a certain kind of migrant at all. Even if you just want to figure out how to host a exchange student program out of your church, churches do that. This grant is eligible for that. It's a really flexible grant. So I'm gonna go ahead. Sorry, I have to keep moving this stuff around. Zoom is not my favorite platform. I'm gonna hit apply. So you'll see all this pop up once you hit apply, and that will send a notification to us that you've opened up the application, started it, in which case you are able to communicate with us about any questions you have. We're very flexible and happy to work with you as you work on your application. All of these applications are due the third Friday of every month. So we review the following Tuesday, so they're due the third Friday. And that will be indefinite until December 31st, just because that's the end of the fiscal year. They may continue after that, or depending on the situation happening, because as we know in migration services, things change, we may adapt new grants at that time, but that doesn't necessarily mean the grant will end on December 31st. That's just when it's being evaluated for efficiency. So it's going to pop up, look like that. I feel like this is all real basic information. You're welcome to ask any questions you have about what these questions are asking, though, and then you choose an amount that you're applying for. These are where it gets more complicated and where folks tend to either not receive the award or be asked to revise, as in these. So when we are asking for capacity and congregational profile, we're asking basically, have you done this before? And again, it's okay if you haven't, you'll just be eligible for a smaller amount of money. This is asking, have you done this before? How many times, when, what was the outcome, and how many folks do you have working on this? Do you have like a team at your church or in your conference that is actively dedicated to this? That's what that question is asking. And then this is asking for the specifics, this question. So are you working with asylum seekers? How many? How long? And what type of project? So this first question is about you and your history with doing this sort of work, or not. Or not is okay, again. And this one is about who and for how long. And then this next question sort of is similar to the last question, but this one asks more, this question asks more specifically, this one's more like the vision. Like, we understand that the problem is that we need more respite care homes. So we intend to open up a respite care home for asylum seekers. Great. This one answers more specifically, we have capacity to provide respite care for single adults. We have capacity to provide respite care specifically from, that are coming from Casa Alitas in Arizona, for example. So just be more specific in this one about where, who you're working with to get these, to serve these migrants, and specifically who can you serve, because serving unaccompanied children is going to be a way different project than serving single adults, than serving families, than serving refugees. So this one asks you a bit more specific. This one's more general. This one's asking for information about the leadership team. Again, that's similar to the first question, except this one will want names and who they are and why they are passionate about this project. And this one is who are the partners. So there's a little bit of repetition involved in these questions, but that's on purpose so that it gives us a clearer picture. Because a lot of times when we're reading these applications, you are on the ground in wherever you're at. We have not necessarily been there. We don't necessarily know who these folks are that you're working with. We can't see what you can see. So the repetition asks you to create a story so that we can see what you see more clearly. And then budget, where else are you getting funding from? Where's the funding that you get from the Global Hope Grant fit into that? Easy peasy. And then we do want to know other funding sources because, of course, it's important to diversify your funding. And we also have information about different types of resources as well if you want to know about where to get money for these projects from other places. That's one resource that we offer at UCC National. A lot of people get tripped up by the W-9. The W-9 is how we pay you if and when you're awarded a grant. The way that we process that information is through what's called a W-9. You could just pull up a W-9, just a blank one, off the internet and fill it out. And I believe a church or a conference, I think there's a question like, is it corporate or something? I think it's C, and that would be the answer. But I'd be happy to help walk you through a W-9 and show you how it's done if you've never filled one out before and you don't understand how it works. And again, the rest of this is just stuff that's standardization for our records, like what's your fiscal agent information, and then do you have endorsement from your conference? And the reason why endorsement from the conference is important is to know that you do have localized support in covenant with UCC National, because we are in covenant with your conferences and your associations as well. And so that's a representation of the covenant. So that one is the booster grant, which again, this one is our most flexible grant. This one is meant to kickstart things that had not previously that had been dormant for a while, or just need an extra boost of support. It is eligible for repeat, but if you want to repeat getting a grant, you have to close out the grant. So you have to, and once you get an award, you'll be sent the link on how to close a grant report, which means that you click on a link that I will send you, and you fill out, this is how we use the money, it has been spent, and we've completed the project, which we love seeing. We love hearing about the outcome. But that way that grant's closed and you can apply again. So you can apply as many times as you want, as long as you've used the previous amounts of funds and you've reported to us how it was used. So that one's the booster grant. This thing's in the way. Sorry, the little bar for Zoom is in the way of me being able to get to the other ones. Let me see. Okay, how do I do this? Okay, sorry, I'm just looking at the chat. Not New Mexico. Well, that's great. I know it's definitely Arizona and Texas. Mainly Texas is the one sending all those migrants, which, you know, I'll send an email with more details about this, like I said, but it could be a good idea if we were better organized. So we're gonna try to organize. Total amount awarded. Yeah, that's the total amount awarded, which we have available for that grant. And we make that really flexible. So we put a certain amount that is meant to go to that based on the amount of funding that we have given from a certain funder or for a certain resource, and we reevaluate it if a lot of people apply, right? So for the Afghan grant, the cap was also 40,000. We ended up granting, I think, something like 100,000 for that one because that situation got so huge, and so that's an internal thing that we look at for our granting ability, just to keep track of the funds and where they're going. So total amount awarded, I mean, yes, we try to stick to that, but just know that we're flexible on that based on what we have, and we do revisit that if a grant ends up being very, very popular, as the Afghan one was. So that one is the booster grant. Okay, let's move on to, I'm gonna move on to the Solidarity Grant because the last one I wanna share with you is no, thank, go away. The most difficult. Okay, so this is the brand new one. We just put this one out the other day. I haven't even told anyone about it yet. So this one's the Solidarity Grant. And this one, again, was developed specifically with the respite center situation in mind, and also the Afghan crisis situation. So we're seeing this year an uptick of absolute crises in the migration world. You know, we had 80,000 Afghan nationals suddenly fly into military bases, a year ago, and that was unheard of. And churches, our churches as well as other churches, went to military bases to volunteer, to send donations, to help with supply chain management. Our churches stepped up. It was awesome. This is for that kind of situation where there's a sudden enormous crisis and you are too busy being the church and going out and doing direct help and whatever's going on that you aren't able to find funding. So you're literally just digging into your own pockets usually trying to figure out how to help whatever crisis is happening. We're seeing that with the migrant buses, which is why I'm going to try to help us preempt that a little better next time it happens, because it will continue happening. For example, in DC and New York, with these migrant buses coming in, we had churches coming to meet the needs and just, taking money out of their pockets and rushing to figure out how to meet sudden crises. So this is a crisis grant in which there has been an event and churches are stepping up to meet the need, but they cannot take the time to apply for funding to make sure that they don't get burnt out or go bankrupt trying to fix the situation. So this one isn't really for individual churches. This is for conferences, associations, and overhead. So if you have a church in New York City, Chicago, wherever, that is doing crisis management, Wisconsin, at the military base, whatever the situation is, and you know that they need help financially, then this is for that conference to be able to apply on their behalf. So these are up to $5,000. And again, this is just, there's this situation that happened. There's a mass migration problem. Church X, Plymouth Church and wherever, or Pilgrim Church, is going to military bases and they're doing supply chain management. They're finding gaps in funding here and here and here. Can you please help fill those gaps? That's basically what this application is. So this could be a reimbursement grant, which means that the church is paying out of their pocket for whatever the situation is, and UCC National pays them back. Or this could be, we know that this big crisis is coming to our city shortly, so here's the amount of money we need to be able to meet the upcoming crisis. So it doesn't have to be reimbursement. Reimbursement grants are always going to, because it's not very fair to make a church pay out of their pocket, but sometimes it happens, right? So this is modeled after a disaster, which is unusual. Migration and disaster have kind of intersected in some weird ways this year, in which ICE and FEMA are working directly together on migrant situations, which, as far as I know, has never really been a thing. But so this is meant to meet that sort of disaster mindset, and it's more a disaster ministries type of grant than it would be normally a refugee services type of grant. So this was developed from our disaster ministries grant. If you are a CDC or work with disaster ministries at the United Church of Christ, you may recognize it. It's the same grant, except it's adapted for refugee and migration. So again, this is for conferences and associations to apply for. A local church can apply for it. It's just the only assumption is that the local church will be busy because of the type of grant it is. So again, because it's a disaster grant, describe the situation, what happened, and then how the money's being used, and then how project evaluation will be conducted. And project evaluation means how is the disaster that's happening, how is the church going to be able to get more sustainable support, future support, so the church doesn't burn out and get stuck in disaster and crisis management for the rest of its life. We don't want that for churches. This is meant to help a church meet an immediate need and then pass it off to bigger fish like a city government, which we see happening a lot. Okay, so if you press apply, you're going to see a lot of that same information. So this, again, is the idea is that a conference minister is writing this, and they're talking about a particular congregation, okay? And so there's the conference. So you're talking about this congregation, and this is the pastor of that congregation, but you, the applicant, are the conference minister, or the associate conference minister, or the secretary, or whoever you are. And then this information is you. The whole idea is to leave that church alone so that they can go about doing the crisis management that they're doing, and then you become the admin, the overhead that helps that church. So again, that's up to $5,000, and you represent the duration of the crisis. And again, these sort of question areas are where a lot of people get tripped up. Just provide as much information as possible, because again, we don't always know what you know. We don't see what you see. And so just providing exactly where things are happening, what types of organizations are already working with them, what kind of migrants they are, what kind of visas they have, what their particular needs are. You know, maybe migrants are showing up without insulin because they've been on the road for days, they've been trapped in ICE detention for months, and they haven't gotten medical care they need. That could be a specific resource that you need help with, is providing medical care or getting them to medical care. Just be really specific as possible about who you're serving and why that population, what happened. And then, of course, we always want to know who the partners are, because we're not expecting a church to be a permanent disaster site for a migration issue. We want to see these issues passed off to local governments and nonprofits that have better equipment to deal long term with whatever the migration crisis is. And then, of course, for who will be served and how many, you don't always know that. So in a disaster, you don't always know that. So my best advice for how to do who will be served and how many is look up historically what's happened there. So if you've got migrants coming into Portland or Seattle or wherever, look at the data about how many migrants in the past have, for asylum seekers from the southern border, have come up through Seattle as their final destination. And you can usually find this information on the DHS website, which I will link to in a follow-up email along with these applications. So I'm just saying, you don't always know who will be served and how many. You don't always know that, but just use historical data as a guess about how many that's going to be. And again, that needs a W-9. All of them do. That's how we pay you. And an endorsement from the conference minister, who will most likely be writing this, just to show that there's covenant being upheld in the process of this grant award. So that one is the Solidarity Grant, which, as I mentioned, is brand new. I haven't even advertised it yet, or we have not received any applications because I haven't opened it yet. But this is crisis. This one's emergency. So again, this one, booster grant, sustainability. The stupid thing keeps going down. Okay, there we go. Okay, sorry, Zoom. The other one is emergency. And this one's sustainability, emergency. This one is my favorite one. And this one's been open for about 6 months already. We have not gotten many applications on it, and the reason why is because it's a little bit confusing. It's confusing for church folks. For a refugee office, it wouldn't necessarily be, because this one replicates this one. So I'm going to show you this first. So this is Health and Human Services, the Office of Refugee Resettlement's website. This is a federal website. And this is a federal grant called Microenterprise Development. So this is meant to be an incentive program for refugees specifically. Our grant is not specifically for refugees, but right now I'm explaining the federal one. So this is used in a lot of refugee office to incentivize refugees to take jobs that they don't want. So if a refugee was an accountant or a doctor or a lawyer or whatever they were, wherever they were, and they get to America and they're being asked to scrub toilets and be security guards, they're not going to want to do that. The refugee office can't bill for that refugee until they've gotten them whatever menial job, and they have to stay in that menial job for 6 months. So this microenterprise grant incentivizes the refugee to stay in that menial job that they don't want for 6 months so that the refugee office can bill for it, and then they get rewarded for staying in that job by getting a matching grant usually it's used to create a business. So the refugee wants to open a barbershop, or they want to open a restaurant. Sometimes they use it to recertify to get their CPA if they want to be an accountant, or go back to college, or in our grant, the federal grant doesn't do this, but our grant, we could use it for business-related cars. So maybe the refugee wants to be a handyman service. Because that's what he did in his home country, or that's what he's good at. So this could potentially fund a car as long as the car is specifically for business use, or delivery driving, although delivery driving is a different story. Anyway, this is basically an incentive grant in which that refugee works for 6 months at a job that they don't like. And then at the end of 6 months, if they've retained that job and saved some money, or the church has saved some money on their behalf, or they saved money together, they can say, look, we've saved $6,000. So you apply for the match for that, which would be $6,000. And then that refugee has $12,000 to go back to school, open a business, buy a handyman truck. And it's a very popular grant that refugees use in refugee offices. Now, I introduced this grant about 6 months ago in the United Church of Christ. But the problem, and so here it is, exact same grant, I just replicated it. And it's not just for refugees though. It can be for asylum seekers, because we're the church, I don't have to stick to federal guidelines. We're the church, and we can serve asylum seekers, we can serve undocumented folks, DACA recipients. But the whole idea is not to get someone out of a pickle, right? The booster grant or the solidarity grant are meant to get someone out of a pickle. This one is meant to incentivize someone into keeping a job that they don't want, basically. And the whole idea that the federal government put together is sort of this American dream concept of, if you pull yourself up by the boots, and I'm not necessarily agreeing with this state of mind, this is just the reason why the grant was created. If you pull yourself up by the bootstraps and really work hard and grit your teeth through things that you don't want to do, this is your reward. It's your incentive. And so we have replicated it in the same way, in that it's mandatory that the refugee, asylum seeker, or whatever the person's status is, has been working in the United States for 6 months, has created some sort of level of sustainability and understanding of the American economy and the system of employment. And this is again a reward for them to be able to open up their business. Now, that's hard for churches to replicate in the same way, because we don't have a billing system looking at us that's telling us that this refugee needs to be in their job for 6 months. Otherwise, the refugee office can't bill. We don't have that as the church. So I think the reason why folks haven't applied for this one is because it's not an incentive concept for churches. However, I watched refugees, when we were doing this grant in the refugee office that I worked for in Seattle, just create the most amazing things from this grant. So we had refugees that created, Somali restaurants, barbershops. They created childcare businesses, got themselves licensed to be a childcare center. What else did they do with it? We saw some people getting handyman trucks to be a cable technician. We saw a cable technician use this grant to go to college to study IT, and then he became a big wig IT guy. Saw another woman do a CPA, an accounting licensure, a U.S. accounting licensure, because she had been an accountant and she wanted to be an accountant again instead of security guard, whatever she was doing. So it's really, refugees love it, because it's like, this is their ticket to be able to thrive. This is the ticket to thrive. And so that's why I decided to open this for the church, is that probably a lot of our Afghan families by now have been employed for 6 months, but they're probably doing jobs that they're like, what am I doing here? And this is meant to help, Ziad figure out how to not cook for a commercial kitchen anymore, instead open his own restaurant, or whatever it is that Ziad's dreams are. So that's the purpose of this one. Now, because it's hard for a church to know how to mediate that in comparison to a trained refugee office, that this is their goal, is to keep someone employed for 6 months, my suggestion is that you bring this grant to the refugee office that you're working with, and you say, if the refugee we're working with wants to do this sort of open their own business or whatever after you're done billing for their employment, then because they're working with us, the UCC Church, they're eligible for this grant. So I've already talked to some refugee offices about this, and that might be a way for you to be able to talk to the refugee about how to do microenterprise, how to open a business, by using the refugee office to talk to them about it. Because the refugee office would know how to do that sort of leveling up of career advancement. But because of your relationship with the refugee would be eligible for the UCC grant. Or, they could also just apply for the federal one. But so this is, again, sort of the most complicated of the three grants, but like I said, it's just really rewarding watching folks who have been through so much see their light shine from doing what they really love because this grant enabled them to be able to get out of a menial situation and into doing what they care about.
Jeannie, can you get it?
I'm just going to go ahead and mute a couple folks. All right, so let me go ahead and walk through the application pro, and this is going to look a lot like the other two. Okay. So again, this one's up to 7,000, and you match whatever they saved or that you, the church, saved in combination with them. So if over those 6 months they saved $2,000, and the church says we want to match too, we're also going to throw in $2,000. Then you've saved 4,000, and then you apply for 4,000. So you apply for whatever match it is that's been saved through this employment. This is all your stuff I described. Just be as specific as possible about who you are, the location that you're in, why you're serving the population you're serving, how long you've been doing it, and then who the family is, and for this one, what their dreams are, and what they used to do in their home country even. You can describe that. And then what they're doing now and for how long. But again, the language of this grant shouldn't be, well, they're destitute because they've got this job, changing hotel linens, and they're not making very much money and they feel sad and poor. I understand that is definitely probably their situation, but because this is an empowerment grant and this is meant to promote flourishing for the refugee or asylum seeker, the language of this grant should be around, this is what the vision for their life would look like if they had access to this education or this business license. That's the language of this grant that should be used consistently across all of this. And then for the budget, it just needs to be really clear about where the matching funding is coming from, and then to match it very specifically to what your request is. And then W-9, like all the rest of them. Fiscal agent information, who are you? And then conference minister, again, that's just for covenantal accountability. So those are the three grants that we offer. Yeah, I guess that's what I wanted to share with you guys, and I will go ahead and open it up for questions.
Can you repeat the question or the timing on the filing of the grants? You said it was the second Tuesday and followed by a submission on the Thursday or whatever that was. Could you repeat that?
Third Friday of every month. So I see in the chat that a lot of folks are dismayed about the fact that asylum seekers often have to wait a long time to get their EAD. So that would mean that they're not eligible for the microenterprise grant, because you have to have an EAD basically, or you have to be working, which we could have a conversation with you about what that looks like for a person without an EAD to be working. But they are eligible for the booster grant, definitely, if they don't have their EAD yet, and they do need that leg up because they're in a desperate situation. That's what the booster grant's for, is to help churches support migrants. So my suggestion is just to not bother with microenterprise grant until they get an EAD.
Can you define EAD, please?
I'm sorry. EAD is an employment authorization document. It gives asylum seekers and refugees the right to work.
I have a question. I belong to a UCC church, and our church is an immigrant welcoming congregation that's part of a larger interfaith network. Would it be better for our congregation to apply for the booster grant or for the ecumenical or interfaith organization?
That's a great question. It needs to be your congregation. All of these grants are only eligible for UCC churches, but you can apply for it on behalf of a larger network. So you say the awardee will be whatever the church name is, except it's going to be for funding for this larger organization.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
If we have questions about a specific situation and eligibility for a particular grant, is there a way we can have a conversation with you? We call you, we email you, what do we do?
Yeah, I highly encourage that because we want to see all of the applications succeed. You know, we love hearing about what everyone's doing. They just have to match the guidelines based on funder preferences. So if you have questions before you apply, yes, please send me an email and I'm happy to get on a Zoom call or a phone call with you to hear about your specific situation and help tailor the grant so that it matches for eligibility.
How do we reach you?
So my email address, I'll drop it in the chat. It's hassani@ucc.org, and I'll just put my phone number and my email address in the chat. I'm usually more available by email than I am by phone because if I'm in a meeting or otherwise preoccupied, I'm not going to be able to answer the phone, of course. But I can always call you back. Okay, that's me. Okay, any other questions?
Sorry, I don't know. Oh. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, I'm in the mountains in Colorado and I was on a hike, so I missed the whole first two, but I see it's being recorded, so I assume I can go back. I don't know. Basically, we're trying to get a car for our family because it just feels like the only way for them to be self-sufficient is getting a car. And I wondered if that, is it even worth talking to you about getting funding to help them get a car?
That's a great question. It's a question that a lot of folks have. So we often encourage using public transportation for a number of reasons, and that's because mainly because public transportation helps folks learn the system of where they're at and learn English in a lot of ways. And also, driving is usually so radically different in the United States than it is wherever they came from. So, however, I understand that a lot of refugees are being resettled outside of the normal radii of large cities where public transportation is available. Although Allison, I'm pretty sure you're in Denver.
No, I'm in Boulder. It's a little different, and and they also have really young children.
Got it. So normally we don't just to reflect practices of federal refugee offices. We don't normally purchase cars. However, it could be eligible for the micro enterprise grant if it was named how the car would be used for work and the 6 months of work history that the head of household has and how they've been getting to work and how this would enhance their career. So it has to be the use of the car, buying a car has to demonstrate significant career advancement. For example, maybe the head of household refugee is driving or is taking the bus an hour away to go work at a hotel, but really what that refugee wants to be doing is I don't know, doing something closer to town. I don't know. I'd have to think. I can't think of a specific. I'm sorry, I can't think of a specific idea of what that would look like. But if you had a compelling reason why that would advance the career of the refugee to have the car, then yes, it would be something we would consider. But just because it would make their lives easier, unfortunately, it's not. Does that make sense? The difference?
Yeah. I get what you're saying. I guess I heard a little bit about your micro grant. I didn't hear the other ones, but I guess so. In our situation, they are working as clerks at night. If he had a car, he could maybe, do something during the day that involves a car, that kind of thing. But that's not really exactly what you were saying about, oh, he wants a career and this and that and the other. But it would certainly help them because they work all night and sleep all day and they don't see their family. I know a lot of people do that, but I'm just saying for many reasons, the car would help them be self-sufficient because just because they have a small family and it's just really hard for them to get anywhere in our area. So
Right, and I totally understand and empathize with that. Just the purpose of that grant doesn't fund for that, and that's just to honor the original intention of the grant, which is just a replication of the federal grant, which would not fund that.
right, but and the booster one doesn't do it either. That you're saying.
No, well, it's not standard practice to fund cars to make life easier. Unfortunately, we don't have any mechanism for that. So my suggestion for that situation, and that's a very common situation, is to have a conversation with the refugee or work with the refugee office to have the conversation with that person about what their dream is in the United States. Like, you don't want to be working nights at this packaging factory. Well, what would you like to be doing? And let's work together about what that looked like. And maybe that would involve a car. But the idea is for he or she to have a dream, a vision that this grant would help them fulfill, rather than just going about the grind. It's a dream grant. Does that make sense? So if you have a conversation with him about what would you like to do if you didn't have to do this, then write that conversation into the grant.
Right. I guess part of it. I mean, you said it's 7,000 matching, so the total could possibly be 14,000. I mean,
Yeah.
you're good. Okay, because I was thinking 7,000 total doesn't get you a college degree, that's for sure. But yeah, I don't know. I'll let someone else ask.
I have a question. When I came in, we're thinking of starting an ESL class for Afghan refugees in our area. And I was thinking in the entire year to get as much as we could to support us in that. And now as I listen to you talking with the booster, it would probably be better to just do it 1 month at a time. Would that be a better way to look at it? I mean,
No, we've had two churches be awarded that booster grant for ESL programs, and both of them said, "Here's the 6-month contract that we worked out with the refugee office. Here's how much it'll cost per month." So I mean, that would be a huge pain for you to use those funds every month and then close out the grant and then reapply. So just apply for 6 months or a year of
6 months.
ESL
Okay.
classes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Heidi, I see your hand up.
Thank you. Just had a quick question, generally speaking. I know that there have been different grants that have come out and been released over time. What's the best way for us to keep abreast of when a new grant might be available? Is there a specific place should we be checking website every month? Is there going to be a press release? Or what's the best way for us to keep on top?
Yeah, so we do a press release every month. So that would be the Global Hope e-news. Unfortunately, our wonderful e-news writer decided to retire, so this is her last week. We'll be hiring a new one. But e-news, we'll sort that out. But e-news is where we have that information. So get signed up for that, which is on the website. Also, if you're on my listserv, I put out that information. But these 3 grants will be open and running until the end of the year, at least.
Thank you.
Okay, questions in the chat. Whoops, really just not a huge fan of Zoom. Sorry, okay, I'm getting down there. Yes, this question about groups visiting ICE detention and doing trainings for boundaries, that is an excellent use of the booster grant. We would love to review that application. Okay. All right, well, if there's no more questions, those are the 3 grants. They are open till the end of the year. We review them the 3rd Friday of every month, and any changes will be described in the e-news. I do encourage you to bring the micro enterprise grant to your local refugee office if you're working with one, and say if there's any refugee here that would be interested in advancing their career, opening a business, you know, getting some funding for college or certification in becoming a hairdresser or something, then refugee office, I'm sure, would love to hear about that grant. So I do encourage you to bring that one to your local refugee offices, or apply for it. It was extremely popular in the refugee offices that I worked for. But the other 2, yes, we look forward to seeing your applications for specifically the booster grant. And if there's a crisis, which does happen more increasingly, solidarity grant is what that one's for. Okay, thank you for attending, everyone, and God bless your ministries. And feel free to email me if you have any specific questions. We are hoping and we are encouraging all of you to apply for grants for success. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Irene.